All right, hey guys, it's Jonathan, and I wanted to talk today about like is weight training bad for young athletes? Now, this video was catalyzed by a post in one of our Facebook groups, and to be honest, some of the answers kind of surprised me. So, the answers that surprised me were the ones that said that weight training was bad for young athletes. Okay, so let me preface this a little bit. Let me give this a little bit of a framework to give some parameters here because young athletes is a vague term, and also weight training is one term, strength training is another term. So let's give this a little bit of let's give it some framework. So what is young? For the case of this video, I'm talking about 10 years and younger. Okay, so um, 14 ish is like freshman year of high school. We're going to bring that down a little bit to younger age because the question that was posted in one of our Facebook groups was actually in regards to a 10-year-old lacrosse goalie. Okay, so let's now qualify, or let's now put some parameters around weight training versus strength training. So I was a strength and conditioning coach for a number of years, ran my own business, worked with athletes. My specialty was working with young athletes, like 14, 15 years old, who were injured, were coming off of injury. I got like the majority of the athletes referred to me were by physical therapists because I had this knack for one, I'm really good with young kids. Secondly, I also have a long-term approach, and I want athletes to just understand that they can get better, they can come back bigger, faster, stronger than they were, that sort of thing. So that was my specialty. So I've got some experience there. Also, my background as an Olympic athlete was really life-changing in terms of what you could do in terms of strength training. So, as a strength and conditioning coach or a performance enhancing specialist, whatever you want to call it, don't ever call me a personal trainer because I was never one of those. The idea is you can improve strength using a lot of different modalities. Like, I used to always say, and a lot of really good strength and conditioning coaches will say that they could train an athlete on a postage stamp and make them stronger, right? Meaning they don't need a lot of space, they don't need a lot of equipment, but the general population thinks like, well, when you improve strength, you're gonna, how are you gonna do that? Now, what's really fascinating to me is the idea that training with weights is somehow perceived as bad. Now, there's a lot of research that has disproven the fact that training with weights is 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 somehow bad. Most parents think though that uh, there's a I shouldn't say not say most anymore because about 15 years ago this really started to change. Back in 2001 was when the boom in youth sports conditioning really took off. And I was part of that. I ran a newsletter called Marketing Tips for Personal Trainers. And I got to see the explosion of a business where in the United States especially, personal trainers started training young athletes, and there was this really big appetite for it. So in and of itself, training a young athlete to get stronger is not a bad idea. The idea, though, about training with weights is also not a bad idea. And when people say that, oh, training with weights is bad, it really blows my mind because, one, as a coach, we've known that this is not the case now for a really long time. So, any kind of perpetuation of that idea that weight training is bad is is not just uh, neutral coaching. Like some coaches will say, like, "Hey, you do you, whatever you want to do. If you want to lift weights, go right ahead." But I'm not going to recommend it. Well, I would say that that advice then from a coach is not just a neutral thing; it's actually incorrect, and it's wrong. And the reason why I say it's wrong is because if you have an athlete who has the resources to train, and what are resources? Time, energy, and money. Or if they have the resources to train, training in a weight room, training with weights is actually one of the things that you can use, right? It's a modality that you can use. And if you just discount that as a way to just say like, oh, it's wrong, that's incorrect. Okay. Because if done properly, like anything, an athlete who trains with weights, we're just kind of kicking Mother Nature in the butt, right? Now, should you do that at 10? I'm going to cover that in a second, okay? But to start, understanding that load is load. If you jump off a step when the body lands and gravity takes hold, there's an impact that we can't replicate in the gym. So when people think like, oh, well, gymnasts, they jump and they tumble and they do all this stuff and they're really small, that's true. And there's some truth to that, young athletes who do a lot of tumbling, a lot of bouncing, that it can be damaging the growth plates. However, you can't replicate those forces in a gym, right? So what ends up happening is a lot of people say like, oh, your athlete should do calisthenics, well, or body weight stuff. Well, I'm going to say that, that's not your first choice either. When it comes to long-term athlete development, okay, when it comes to the idea and long-term athlete development was developed by a guy named Ishvan Bali, and it was kind of furthered, especially in Canada, by a guy named Richard Way, who I know. And Ishvan, I can't remember where he came from, like either the Czech Republic or Hungary. Apologize, Ishvan, if I'm forgetting where exactly. But the idea was that, you know, an athlete should have a well-rounded base of development. And so the general idea there is that your athlete should not just be doing one sport, they should be doing multiple sports. And I call that developing like a 360-degree athlete. So what does that mean? Well, if your athlete is playing, let's say they play football in the fall, well, they should play maybe basketball in the winter. Or let's say they play lacrosse, same thing. There's some sports that we steer athletes to more than others. Okay, um, so if your athlete is a soccer player, then in the winter maybe they play ice hockey. In the spring maybe they play baseball or lacrosse. There are, depending on your athlete's main sport, we're going to recommend other sports to supplement it. Now, the idea for a lot of athletes, and I've covered this before, is that a lot of young athletes, especially with club sports now, when they go play their club, they're getting a really fantastic experience. They should be, right? But they might get, and what I mean by that is they might be they're getting better gear, they're around better players. The overall mentality of the athletes is a little bit higher than they get in high school. Or for those of us, especially when we played multiple sports in high school, you play in high school and you're going to get a handful of kids who are good, and then you get the rest of the team. And now when you play club, you kind of flush out the rest of the team and you're playing with really good players, players that have a higher kind of sport IQ in that matter. But so I get it when a young athlete goes like, "Oh, I don't want to play that other sport at maybe at my high school because they're bad or the coach is bad or the team, the jerseys suck." Like any of that stuff, affects it. But that's where the parent has to come into play and say, "Hey, listen, if you want to be better at your sport, you're not going to become ultimately really good by just playing that sport." Okay, so that's where in long-term athlete development, we encourage athletes to play other sports, especially at younger ages, right? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, getting around 13, 14 years of age, there's still an argument for them to play other sports. But I get it. The pressure for club sports is now where, athletes got to kind of have to choose, and there's opportunities where if they don't play with a team and that maybe in the summer, they're not going to get a chance to play in the fall or whatever. So I get it. That's where the parent really needs to step in and say, hey, no, listen, we got to be playing other sports. Okay. So if you're in a situation where the athlete can't play other sports and you think, well, what else could they do? Well, two great sports that I recommend and that most coaches would recommend in order for your athlete to play if they can't play some other sport is to do gymnastics or wrestling. All right. Those two sports out of any sport really give your body an incredible base of strength and what's called like proprioception, like basically knowing where the body is in space, um, balance, explosiveness, things like that, right? So you can never go wrong with putting your athlete into gymnastics and or wrestling to develop a more holistic athlete. But what are you doing when you do that? Well, you're building a well-rounded base, but you're also developing some strength, right? Now, what's really fascinating to understand is that you take two athletes of equal technical ability, right? And if you go to theathleteos.com, look in our free resources section, watch the athlete success framework video. You'll learn more about like the abilities, the 3 key abilities of every athlete. But the idea is that you must understand that you take 2 athletes of equal technical ability, the one who's the better athlete, the stronger athlete will win. So, why is that important? Well, one, it's the easiest thing for us to improve. By taking an athlete and putting them in the gym, in the weight room, and teaching them how to be, how to lift weights, there's some athletes that really respond to that. And it's amazing how easy it is to improve the strength and the flexibility of an athlete in a gym than it is sometimes to, put them out on the field of play in another sport. I've seen that uh, like again and again and again. I've worked with young athletes where their primary sport was soccer, and for whatever reasons, that's all they would do or all they could do. But they came to me to learn, to get stronger, and we were able to change their flexibility issues and their strength issues and imbalance issues. And then when they went back to their sport, they were immediately faster. I would say like in 4 weeks, you can make an impact on an athlete. In 12 weeks, you can totally change an athlete. In basically 180 days and 6 months, you can take an athlete who was mediocre and make them great just because their their agility is better, their speed is better, their top end speed is better. Everything changes, right? So the weight room is a really great place to do that. Now, I'll just give the caveat that you have to do it with someone who knows what they're doing. All right. But even then, what's fascinating, what's happened in the last like 20 years is you can take an athlete, like let's say it's a soccer player or a lacrosse player, and you can take them to your local like powerlifting gym, no joke. And some of those powerlifting coaches, not all, but some, are a really good combination of part strength coach, part physical therapist. And it's pretty amazing. Okay. It's amazing to see how that's kind of evolved over the last 20 years or so. So I'll say it again. The recommendation that weight training is bad for an athlete is wrong. It is flat out wrong. It's not neutral. And the reason I say that is because if you take, there's no neutral in sport. And so what that means is either you're doing things that take you towards your goal or away from your goal. And the reason why there's no neutral is because there's other athletes who are training and doing things that are a better choice, that are reaching themselves towards their goal, right? Nobody's standing still, right? So the idea though is asking like, well, what's best for your athlete? Okay. So I started to say before that sometimes athletes don't want to do another sport for whatever reason. Maybe their friends are on the team, and they're not on the other team, or the other team that that other sport that you would like them to do is full of kids who are either really advanced technically, like they've been doing that sport for a long time, and your athlete feels like completely out of water trying to do it, or the mentality of the athletes on that team is not at a level where your athlete is going to be kind of excited to be around that. And that's a big factor, right? Community is a big factor. Like being part of a group of kids is a big factor. So if your athlete doesn't resonate with any of that, but for whatever reason, you can get them involved in a weight training program, then they may really enjoy that. Okay. And they're going to get more out of it than if they did nothing at all. And there's probably some argument sometimes where it's like, okay, if you're choosing, and I give this advice all the time, if you're choosing between, let's say, playing another club season, right? Or like, let's say your club is out of its main season, but there's a coach getting a couple of kids together twice a week and they're going to do this or whatever. Usually it's better to take that same amount of money and put it towards a qualified strength and conditioning coach who can help get your athlete, one, in love with training, but also get them stronger. And whether it's boys or girls, there's something really transformative of getting them in a weight room and teaching them how to be strong and how to brace themselves and to really like give them all the tips and tricks on how to lift a weight that they're not usually, that they've never done before. And this is where a lot of parents go, well, isn't that unsafe? And I'm going to tell you that if your athlete is in a contact sport, like football, ice hockey, lacrosse, rugby, they are going to experience more force in those sports than you can ever deal with in a weight room. Okay? You can't load up a kid in the weight room with the same type of forces as they get on the field of play. So the reason why I say that is then you should be looking at the sport environment as more intense and has more potential for injury than a qualified coach in the weight room. Okay? So what do you do then? Like, where do you go from here? Who do you look for? What do you do? Well, you're my first like search when I'm dealing with an athlete, like in our athlete OS program, and they're looking for a strength coach in their local area. I migrate oftentimes to powerlifting gyms, and then I look for the contact page or the coach's page or whoever's runs the show to see what their qualifications are. And by looking at their qualifications, I can know if that's somebody who is going to be good or maybe not so good. The general public doesn't always pick that up because you see all these certifications, you don't really know what they mean. So the first place that I look is powerlifting gyms that have some sort of a sport component. Even if they don't have a sport component, I'm still looking for like the head coach, and I know because I've done this over and over again that I can send an athlete there, and you know what, as long as that coach makes it fun and it doesn't scare the kids, then they're gonna really embrace it. Now, the one thing I should just mention here is a lot of times parents will write to me or send me an email, things like that, and they'll go like, "Well, what if I want to train with them? What if they want to train with me?" And that's awesome, right? And that is something that a lot of coaches don't really understand. So like if you're a mom or a dad and your athlete is, let's say, 8, 10, 12, maybe 13, 14 years old, and you know, you, they want to start to do stuff, or you'd like them to start doing stuff, and you do stuff. So maybe you do stuff in your own home. Um, that's fine if you have a relationship with your kid in such a way that they want to do it with you. So, for example, like I've had parents who they were, you know, firefighters, police officers, sometimes military, and the dad or the mom had a regimen at home where they worked out. And that by all means, that's a great place. If your athlete if you have the relationship there and you want to do that at home, do it. Like do it. It's wicked. So, and also as a parent, I know how valuable that time is. Right? That's time that you won't get back with your kid, and it's a great bonding moment. So if you feel like you're qualified enough and you can introduce your athlete into weight training, by all means go for it. Now, that doesn't mean that teaching a kid just how to do push-ups isn't of benefit either, right? Many times I'll run an athlete through just an assessment, and some like I've had this happen with really talented athletes, and where they're technically really good in their sport, but then they can't do a push-up, like a real good push-up. And one of the best things that you can teach any athlete at any age is a solid push-up, right? And there's nothing more impressive seeing like a really young kid whipping off like 10 good push-ups. And all that takes is discipline, right? All that takes is a little bit of routine, and it just changes things 100%. So let's not discount that. But let's say you're a mom and you do Pilates at home. Well, I'm all for Pilates. I think Pilates is one of the best things that any athlete can do. Uh, Much of my input, like when I was running my strength and conditioning business, much of our movement prep was based around like Pilates type exercises. The problem is with Pilates specifically is Pilates was never like patented. So what happened is that there's a lot of different kind of bastardizations of Pilates, right? If you go to New York and you train with like a ballet coach and it's like hardcore Pilates, you're going to do this thing called the 100. And the 100, in my opinion, is one of the biggest wastes of time ever. But if you go to a strength and conditioning coach who understands some of the benefits and the basis of kind of that core philosophy that Pilates gives you, That's awesome. But you're going to lose kids. Just isn't an entertainment value. Let's put it that way. Right? I've known this for years that, with young athletes, there's part entertainment and there's part, edutainment. So at first you've got to entertain the kids long enough that they want to continue. And then you get to a point where you can start to edutain them, right? And then you get to a point for those athletes that really kind of switch where you can educate them. So can you do that with an athlete who's 10 years old? By all means. If the coach involved or the coaches involved who are working in the gym with that athlete understand that entertainment value and they can keep it fun and they can keep the kids safe, then it's awesome. Okay. I always lean more towards individual training than for like a team training thing. I've said this for years, like team strength and conditioning work should not be some team building activity. So if you can get that athlete like personalized work and keep it fun and keep it interesting, they're going to benefit 100%. And like I said, in a month, you'll see a change. In 3 months, you'll see a definite change. In 6 months, you can take a kid who's moderate technically and you can increase their ability physically, and they will dominate based on their physical ability, and then we're just waiting for the technical ability to to catch up, right? And this is one thing to consider too, and I'll finish off on this. If your athlete is young, and let's say they're a July baby, so they're 6 months, depending on what your sport is, that 6 month difference between a January baby and a July baby, or longer, right? August, September, October, November, December, that's enough of a gap where some athletes, especially when they hit like kind of puberty, is you'll have athletes that will just grow and will dominate a more technical athlete who Mother Nature hasn't, kicked in puberty yet. And you may lose that kid from the sport completely. They can get checked out of the sport. They can just get demoralized because everybody around them is bigger, faster, stronger. And that's where weight training, specifically weight training, can really change an athlete. I'll say it again. I'll finish off on this. Boys, and especially the girls, there's something about getting a young athlete in the weight room and teaching them how to lift and be strong and lift something heavy and get all their force behind it, and then they take that out on the field of play, and all of a sudden they shock themselves with what they can do, like the velocity of the shot, fighting for a ball, tackling somebody, all that stuff improves, right? 100%. So is weight training safe for young athletes? Is it advised for young athletes? Hell yeah, right? As long as you can find someone who's qualified, but that really doesn't take much work. Should you as the parent do it? Maybe. If you've got the resources, like and your athlete wants to do it and you want to lift with them and they respond to you as a parent, by all means, go for it. Okay. I've seen amazing things happen. The advice that weight training for young athletes is bad is incorrect advice. It's wrong, right? We've proven this. It's about 15 years ago. That was well taken care of. Okay. So is it your first choice? No. You should have your athlete involved with other sports, but when you take into consideration that the birth year and or the time of year they're born and how effective, sometimes it's better to invest in a qualified strength and conditioning coach who can help take your athlete to the next level than to force them through or put them in, not even force, but just have them in another season of their sport with people that they know. You'll get a bigger bang from your buck investing in some good strength and conditioning work than you will get in another season, slightly out of season of your main sport, if that makes sense. Okay. So I know this will rub some people the wrong way, and that's awesome. I love it. Do me a favor, hit the like button if you like this. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, because there's a lot. I was surprised at some of the comments in our Facebook group about that, just how ill-informed some people were. And some of these people are coaches, And I get it. Sometimes coaches can totally get set in their ways, and they're volunteer coaches, and they're helping out with the technical aspect of their sport, the technical and the tactical stuff, but the physical side is not their expertise. But that mentality, that old information that weight training is somehow bad, is we're done with that. We've been done with it since about 2004. Okay. So with that in mind, leave your comments below. Let me know if weight training has helped you, if it hurts you, why, who is coaching you, who is doing it with you, right? Or if you did it and you saw big improvements, leave a comment. Be much appreciated.